Judge insults Jasmine Crockett in court. Minutes later, she turns the tables and gets him arrested. The courtroom was packed from wall to wall, and there was a buzz in the air, like everyone could sense something explosive was about to go down. At the bench sat Judge Whittaker, famous around town for his gruff manner and bad temper. He glared across the room with a sneer that could make anyone's stomach twist. Sitting at the defense table was Jasmine Crockett. She was trying her hardest not to let her nerves show, but deep down, her heart was hammering. Still, she kept her head high. She'd worked too long and hard to let a sour-faced judge intimidate her. All of a sudden, Judge Whittaker slammed his gavel. The crack it made echoed off the high ceilings. "Miss Crockett," he barked, "if this is your idea of a defense, then I'd hate to see how poorly you do your homework. Do you think you can just waltz in here with your half-baked arguments and make a mockery of my courtroom?" A soft gasp traveled through the crowd. People exchanged shocked glances, some leaning forward like they couldn't believe the judge just said that out loud. But Jasmine refused to shrink. She took a breath, met his stare, and spoke in a calm, even voice. "Your Honor," she said, "I'm here to represent my client. I've prepared thoroughly and—" "Don't interrupt me," he snapped, eyes blazing. "I'll run this courtroom how I see fit. You just make sure you're not wasting my time." That insult stung more than Jasmine let on, but she'd been underestimated before. If there was one thing she'd learned, it was how to use someone else's arrogance against them. And she had a growing suspicion that Judge Whittaker's wrath was more than just a temper tantrum. It was covering something bigger. She didn't know it yet, but in just a few minutes, that hunch would flip the whole courtroom upside down. And it would end with none other than Judge Whittaker himself in handcuffs. Jasmine felt every eye in the courtroom on her, and for a moment, it was like time slowed down. The judge's mocking words echoed in her head, but instead of crumbling, she tightened her jaw and straightened her shoulders. If anyone thought she was going to wilt under Judge Whittaker's scorn, they were in for a surprise. She remembered the countless late nights she'd spent buried in law books, juggling part-time jobs, and enduring skeptical professors who doubted her abilities. She thought of her father's gentle reassurance when she nearly dropped out of law school, reminding her that no one could define her worth but herself. It was that small spark of inner strength that she clung to now, refusing to let Whittaker's insults crush her. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, calm but firm. "I'm fully prepared to argue my case. I'd appreciate an opportunity to present the facts." A low murmur swept through the gallery. Some people were impressed by her poise. Others clearly expected her to cave. Judge Whittaker eyed her like hawk, looking for any sign of weakness. The tension was thick enough to choke on, but Jasmine refused to show fear. "Present the facts, then," he snapped, leaning forward. "But don't expect me to sit here all day, listening to amateur hour." Jasmine swallowed hard. She knew she had to keep her composure, but inside, a fierce determination burned. If this judge thought he could walk all over her just because he wore the robe, he'd clearly never met Jasmine Crockett before. She flipped open her notes and began laying out her argument, her voice never wavering. Each sentence was backed by long hours of research, every reference double-checked and triple-checked. The moment was bigger than a single hearing. In her mind, it was about proving, both to herself and to everyone watching, that she belonged in this courtroom. And as the minutes ticked by, Jasmine sensed something changing in the room, a flicker of respect from a few spectators, or a hush that fell whenever she spoke. Whittaker might not have noticed it yet, but the balance of power was slowly starting to shift. Little did he know, his insult had only fueled Jasmine's resolve. And soon enough, that spark of defiance was going to set off an explosion that would leave the entire courtroom, and Judge Whittaker himself reeling. Just as Jasmine was hitting her stride, citing case law and methodically chipping away at the prosecution's arguments, something happened that turned the whole proceeding on its head. One of the court clerks, who'd been shuffling papers at a nearby desk, suddenly frowned at a document she was reviewing. She hesitated, then tapped on the bailiff's shoulder and whispered something in his ear. Everyone in the courtroom froze for a beat, sensing that whatever had caught her eye was important. The bailiff's eyes flicked toward Judge Whittaker. Then he carefully tucked the paper under his arm and hurried around the back of the gallery. Jasmine felt a ripple of unease run down her spine. The intensity in the clerk's face was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Judge Whittaker pretended not to notice, though his jaw tightened slightly. Without addressing the strange interruption, he banged his gavel and said, "Move it along, Ms. Crockett. Unless you plan on boring everyone here to death, I suggest you get to the point." Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had no idea what was happening behind the scenes, but she could tell it was big. Still, she focused on delivering the next part of her argument until the clerk's voice rang out loud and clear. "Your Honor," she said, stepping forward with a tremor in her words, "we have a new piece of evidence here." A hush fell over the room so quickly it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Jasmine's heart jumped. Something told her this discovery was more than just an extra page of a file. It might be the key to exposing why the judge had seemed so unnaturally hostile. Judge Whitaker's face paled for the briefest moment. "Hand it over," he barked, still gripping his gavel like a lifeline. As the clerk moved closer, Jasmine noticed the slightest flicker of panic in the judge's eyes, an emotion he usually kept hidden behind that smug demeanor. Whatever was in that document, Jasmine could sense it was about to change everything. And at that precise second, she finally realized that the judge's insults and outbursts might not have just been about intimidation. They could have been a desperate attempt to keep certain truths buried. Jasmine's eyes flicked to the document and the clerk's trembling hands. Even from across the room, she sensed it was dynamite, potentially something that could rip the whole case wide open. The judge, meanwhile, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. His usual sneer gave way to a tension that deepened with every second the clerk stood there. "Your Honor," Jasmine said, trying to keep her voice steady, "before we proceed, I'd like to request a short recess to review. I decide when we take breaks." Judge Whitaker snapped, though his bluster seemed forced. He snatched the document from the clerk's hand and scanned it so quickly it was a wonder he could process a single word. His face darkened like a storm cloud. "This is irrelevant," he growled, tossing the paper aside. "We'll not be wasting the court's time on wild goose chases." That was enough to set alarm bells ringing in Jasmine's mind. She could practically feel the tension sparking off him, like he was a volcano about to blow. The more he tried to shove the evidence aside, the more convinced she became he had something to hide, and she was dangerously close to it. Summoning her courage, Jasmine stepped forward. "Your Honor, with respect, I believe this new information is critical for a fair hearing. Ignoring it could jeopardize justice." His response was immediate, almost too quick. He pounded the gavel so hard it made a few people in the gallery jump. "That's quite enough, Ms. Crockett. Another word and I'll hold you in contempt." The threat crackled in the air, but Jasmine refused to flinch. "Judge Whitaker," she continued, trying to sound measured even as her adrenaline pumped, "I request a closer look at that document. If it's truly irrelevant, we can establish that on the record." A few onlookers exchanged glances, sensing the power dynamic was shifting. Not long ago, Jasmine seemed like the underdog, but now she was standing up to the judge's intimidation. And for the first time, Whitaker's bellowing didn't come off as confident. It felt desperate. "You want it on the record?" he repeated, sneering. "Fine. Let it be known that Ms. Crockett is requesting evidence she has no right to see." But his words only served to reinforce suspicion. With her heart pounding, Jasmine pressed on. She might not have known exactly what was in that document, but the judge's reaction spoke volumes. Every second he refused to release, it only made him look more compromised. And in that charged moment, Jasmine realized she had a new mission, to bring out the truth that Judge Whitaker was fighting so hard to keep hidden, before his insults and threats could silence her or anyone else who dared to challenge him. Jasmine took a steadying breath, her mind racing with possibilities. Judge Whitaker was desperate to keep the document under wraps, and every fiber of her being told her this was the key to toppling his wall of arrogance. She glanced around the courtroom, taking in the curious faces of the gallery, the silent tension of the bailiff, and the worried look on the clerk's face. They all sensed that something big was about to unfold. With her voice calm but resolute, Jasmine began her strategic counterattack. "Your Honor, I'm concerned about the fairness of these proceedings. The court clerk clearly believed this document was relevant, and it's part of my responsibility to ensure that all pertinent evidence is presented." Judge Whitaker glowered at her. "You don't get to decide what's pertinent. That's my job." Jasmine squared her shoulders, forcing a confidence she didn't entirely feel, but she knew she had to appear unshakable. "Exactly," she said, maintaining eye contact with him. "Which is why I'm requesting that this document be admitted into evidence. If there's nothing to hide, surely we can allow the record to reflect that." That struck a nerve. The judge slammed his gavel again, the crack echoing through the silent hall. "Overruled," he snapped, then added in a heated rush, "and if you keep badgering this court, I'll hold you in contempt so fast your head will spin." The threat hung heavy in the air, but Jasmine pressed on. She could almost taste the truth on the tip of her tongue. "Your Honor, may I approach the bench?" she asked, keeping her tone respectful but firm. He scowled, gripping the edge of his bench like it was a lifeline. "Fine, but make it quick." Jasmine walked up, her heels echoing on the polished floor. She leaned in, her voice low so the gallery wouldn't hear. "Judge Whitaker," she said, "something about this document has you rattled. If it's truly irrelevant, let it be shown on the record. But if there's anything that calls into question the integrity of this court, I have a duty to bring it forward." He stared at her livid. In that moment, his composure cracked just enough for Jasmine to see the fear in his eyes. Whatever was in that document wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous to him. And that was all the confirmation Jasmine needed. She returned to her table, head buzzing. From here on out, she was playing offense. She'd gather every thread of evidence she could, question any witness who might shed light on the situation, and keep pushing until the truth saw the light of day. Judge Whitaker might have tried to humiliate her, but he had no idea who he was up against. Over in the gallery, a few people looked at Jasmine with cautious admiration, as if realizing for the first time that she wasn't going to be intimidated. With the judge flustered and the courtroom on edge, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake everyone to their core, and Jasmine was poised to deliver the knockout blow. From that moment on, everything happened at lightning speed. Word spread around the courthouse that Judge Whitaker was refusing to release a mysterious document, and speculation ran wild. The defense counsel from another case peeked into the courtroom, curiosity shining in her eyes. Even some of the spectators who drifted out for a coffee break rushed back in, eager to see the drama unfold. Sensing the tension, Jasmine leaned over to her colleague at the table. "Look," she whispered, "we need to find out exactly what's in that file. If he's trying this hard to bury it, there must be something huge in there." Her colleague nodded, already pulling out a laptop. "I'll see what I can dig up," he murmured, though his voice trembled with excitement. They knew they were operating on borrowed time. Judge Whitaker could slam a contempt order on them at any moment if he thought they were overstepping. Meanwhile, the judge was losing his cool in a big way. He shouted at the bailiff to maintain order, barked at the clerk to mind her own business, and glared daggers at anyone who dared meet his eye. But each outburst only fueled people's suspicions. After all, if there was nothing to hide, why act so panicked? Jasmine watched him carefully, her pulse thudding in her ears. She'd seen bullies before, but none quite like Whitaker. This felt less like a tantrum and more like a desperate scramble. He's covering his tracks, she thought. That means there's a trail. Suddenly, her colleague hissed, "Jasmine," and slid the laptop toward her. There on the screen was a scanned court record, one that tied Judge Whitaker to questionable rulings, all suspiciously in favor of certain well-connected individuals. Kickbacks, bribes. The evidence was laid out in black and white. And it wasn't just a rumor. These were official documents that someone had tried to bury. Jasmine's eyes widened. All her instincts roared to life. She'd known something was off about Whitaker's hostility, but she'd never dreamed it ran this deep. Heart pounding, she straightened up and held the judge's gaze from across the room. That was the moment things truly began to escalate. Jasmine stood, preparing to address the court again, determined to bring these revelations to light. The judge saw her move and slammed his gavel so hard it nearly splintered. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could unleash another tirade, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Uniformed officers stepped inside, their expressions grim. Murmurs swept through the crowd, and Jasmine felt a surge of hope. They must know. The truth is finally catching up. In just a matter of minutes, the entire atmosphere shifted. The judge had gone from total control to watching his own authority slip through his fingers. And Jasmine Crockett, once the target of his insults, was about to turn the tables in a way no one would ever forget. A hushed sense of awe spread over the courtroom as those uniformed officers strode down the aisle. Everyone, spectators, attorneys, even a few reporters who'd sneaked in, held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Judge Whitaker, who'd seemed larger than life just moments ago, wore a look of pure disbelief. It was as if his world had instantly shrunk, and he didn't know which way to turn. Jasmine stood, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She gathered every ounce of courage she had and addressed the officers calmly. "These documents," she said, gesturing toward the screen on her colleague's laptop, "suggest a serious breach of judicial ethics. Possibly worse. I believe they warrant immediate attention. Judge Whitaker slammed his gavel again, but it no longer held the same authority. This is an outrage, he roared. His voice cracked halfway, betraying the panic bubbling beneath. Bailiff removed. He didn't get a chance to finish. One of the officers, a seasoned detective by the look of him, held up a hand. Judge Whitaker, he said in a measured tone, we have enough evidence to detain you. We'd like you to come with us quietly. For a split second, you could have heard a pin drop. Then chaos erupted, people gasped, reporters scrambled for their phones, and the bailiff stood frozen, unsure who to follow, the judge's orders or the police. The second officer stepped forward, speaking firmly over the commotion. We've uncovered files linking you to multiple counts of corruption. We're placing you under arrest. Judge Whitaker's face drained of color. He lurched forward as if to shout more orders, but the words never formed. Instead, the officers moved in, and a stunned hush fell over the room again. Nobody could believe what they were seeing. The very man who had been spewing insults just moments before was now being read his rights. Jasmine forced herself to stay steady, even as relief and adrenaline coursed through her veins. A reporter's camera flashed, capturing the judge's final moment of sham authority as they cuffed him. He tried one last time to turn the tables, glaring at Jasmine with red-hot anger. This isn't over, he spat through clenched teeth. But deep down, everyone in that courtroom, Jasmine included, knew it was. In mere minutes, Judge Whitaker had gone from bullying those who stood before him to facing the fallout of his own crimes. And Jasmine Crockett, the lawyer he tried to humiliate, stood tall in the center of it all, having played a key role in setting the scales of justice back in balance. In the stunned silence that followed Judge Whitaker's arrest, it felt like the entire courthouse was exhaling at once, like a huge weight had been lifted. The officers escorted him out, cuffs clinking, while spectators gaped and reporters shot rapid-fire questions nobody had answers to yet. The judge's furious protests echoed down the hallway until the doors finally swung shut behind him. Jasmine stood near her table, her legs still trembling from the flood of adrenaline. This was the moment she'd fought so hard for, yet it felt almost surreal. She was the one who had gone toe-to-toe with Whitaker. She was the one who had insisted on exposing the truth despite his threats. And now that truth had prevailed. Nice job, one of the bailiffs whispered as he passed by, giving her a respectful nod. That simple acknowledgement nearly brought tears to her eyes. She'd spent so long trying to prove she belonged in that courtroom, and now she had definitive proof that she'd made the right choice in standing her ground. Within the hour, news stations were broadcasting the story, Judge Whitaker under fire for corruption. Secret documents reveal massive bribery scheme. Jasmine Crockett's determination helps uncover scandal. The headlines rolled in so fast that Jasmine didn't have time to process them all. But the more she heard, the more a sense of calm conviction replaced her earlier nerves. After the dust settled, the court immediately announced an internal review of all cases Whitaker had overseen. Other lawyers approached Jasmine, some shaking her hand, others offering hushed, grateful words. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for not backing down. She realized that her victory was bigger than just one corrupt judge. It was a message to anyone who tried to manipulate the justice system. Finally stepping outside into the crisp afternoon air, Jasmine took a moment to let it all sink in. The day had started with scornful insults aimed at her from a bench. It ended with the once untouchable Judge Whitaker facing charges of corruption and bribery. And in between, she had proven that nobody, not even a judge, was beyond accountability. As she walked down the courthouse steps, bystanders parted for her as though she were a force of nature, their eyes filled with respect rather than doubt. Jasmine Crockett had shown everyone, that courage, preparation, and an unwavering sense of right could topple even the highest walls of arrogance. And though there were surely more battles ahead, this one victory would stand as a testament that justice could indeed be served when good people refused to be silenced. In the days that followed Judge Whitaker's arrest, the courthouse was buzzing with a strange mix of shock and relief. Investigations ramped up, revealing an intricate web of corruption that stretched beyond anything most people had imagined. Lawyers who once dreaded stepping into Whitaker's courtroom now breathed easier, and old cases he presided over were reopened for review. Through it all, Jasmine tried to keep her head down, focusing on her clients and making sure justice was served wherever she could help. Yet no matter how she tried to play it cool, people kept stopping her in the hallways, thanking her for standing up to Whitaker. One older attorney, a mentor figure she'd always looked up to, clasped her hand and said, You showed all of us that courage can topple even the highest walls. Don't ever forget that. Local news outlets covered the fallout nonstop. They highlighted the role Jasmine played in uncovering the judge's corruption, and speculation ran wild about how he'd managed to hide it for so long. But at every turn, Jasmine stayed focused on her mission to ensure that the law protected those who needed it most. Finally, on a sunny afternoon almost a week later, Jasmine found herself back in that same courtroom. Only this time, Judge Whitaker's seat was empty. A new judge, appointed on an interim basis, presided over the docket. The difference in atmosphere was palpable. No more fear, no more tension. It was like someone had thrown open a window, letting in a fresh breeze of possibility. As she wrapped up a hearing for a completely unrelated case, Jasmine glanced at the empty bench and felt a wave of satisfaction, mixed with a hint of sadness. Whitaker had tainted the dignity of the court, and it would take time and effort for everyone to truly trust the system again. But at least now they had a chance to rebuild. Stepping out into the sun, she took a slow, deep breath. Things weren't perfect, no system ever was, but she'd learned something powerful. When good people refused to be silenced, justice had a fighting chance. And for Jasmine Crockett, that was more than enough reason to keep pushing forward, one case at a time. The scandal surrounding Judge Whitaker continued to unravel in the weeks that followed, reaching far beyond the walls of Jasmine's courtroom. New evidence surfaced about backdoor deals, manipulated rulings, and hidden bank deposits, each revelation more damning than the last. The press called it one of the biggest judicial scandals the county had ever seen. But for Jasmine Crockett, life returned, at least somewhat, to its normal rhythms. She still spent long nights preparing briefs and strategy sessions, still worried over clients who needed someone to stand up for them. Yet there was a difference in her now, a quiet confidence born from staring down a judge who'd once seemed untouchable. One afternoon, she received word that Whitaker's official trial date had been set. When she arrived at the courthouse that day, she spotted a gathering of onlookers, reporters snapping photos, and former defendants of Whitaker's who'd come to watch the man face justice. Rather than dread, she felt a certain resolve. This was how it should be, a courtroom where truth was allowed to breathe, where even the powerful could be held accountable. The trial itself was relatively swift. Evidence spoke louder than any testimony Whitaker could muster. Transaction records, suspicious rulings, and witness accounts painted a stark picture of abuse of power. As the verdict was read, guilty on multiple counts, a weight seemed to lift off everyone's shoulders. For months, people had wondered if the system would protect its own. Instead, it protected the truth. Afterward, Jasmine stepped outside to find a few reporters waiting, their microphones and cameras aimed in her direction. She hesitated but decided to address them briefly. "Justice is for everyone," she said, voice steady. Judge Whitaker violated that principle, and the law did what it was meant to do, hold him accountable. I only hope today's outcome reminds people that no one is above the law. There was a round of questioning, how she felt about the judge's downfall, whether she'd worry about retribution in future cases, but Jasmine calmly deflected. This wasn't about personal triumph. It was about restoring faith in the courts. As she walked away from the cameras, the late afternoon sun warmed her face. A sense of closure settled around her, not just for this case, but for every doubt she'd carried since stepping into that courtroom the first day. She might not have imagined herself at the center of a scandal, let alone bringing down a corrupt judge, but she had proven that even the most intimidating forces could crumble under the weight of truth. There would be more battles ahead. That much she knew. But for now, Jasmine Crockett allowed herself a rare, unguarded smile. She'd stood up, she'd refused to be bullied, and in the end, she helped restore a measure of justice where it mattered most. And as she headed back to her office, she held on to that feeling of triumph, letting it strengthen her resolve for whatever came next.